Hello and welcome to our Recruitment and Admissions City Year Application Tip virtual panel. Today we have three representatives from a recruitment and admissions team working with City Year, as well as two City Year alumni who will be sharing with you and answering questions about the application process, the interview process, and a little bit more about our program as well. So my name is Alyssa Krutoff. I am a senior regional recruitment manager sitting in Philadelphia with the Mid-Atlantic region. And what we're going to do today, we're going to have a few introductions as folks join us. Please, you will be on mute, so feel free to, can unmute you if you have questions, and you can use the chat over on the right-hand side to ask any questions that you might have. So just let us know if you have questions at any time, and I can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself, and you can also just shoot questions right into the chat feature. If you are on the telephone, I think you might need to only ask questions, but I'm not 100% sure, so I apologize in advance. We have a few questions, a few overview questions, and then we'll open it up for questions from any of our participants, and then we'll wrap up around 7 p.m. or if we end sooner. So if I can, I'm just going to let our our panelists share a little bit about themselves as well as their role here with City Year.
Hey y'all, my name is Zach Draper. I am a regional admissions manager. I support our sites in Jacksonville and Columbia, where my job is to go through our applications and schedule interviews and select our core members for the year.
Hi, everyone. Oh, go ahead, Don, would you like to go? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Karina. I am the regional recruitment manager sitting out of Miami in the South. I served with City Year from 2015 to 2016.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dawn Listoka. I'm a senior regional recruitment manager in the Mid-Atlantic region, and I'm based out of Philadelphia and on the ground at college campuses and high schools looking for young people to serve.
Thank you. So I'll pass it on over to Dawn. If you can tell us a little bit about the recruitment process, what happens within the recruitment process, and then we'll pass it over. When Dawn is finished, we'll pass it over to Zach to talk a little bit about what happens after you submit your application.
Sure. So typically once someone expresses interest in the program, they will start receiving emails from City Year that provide information that's helpful in learning to know more about the core member experience, the culture of our organization, and also connection with a City Year recruiter. So if you are currently have a started application with City Year, you most likely have received an email from your City Year recruiter, and that's an opportunity for you to connect with one of us to talk about your career goals, your interests, your passions, and have your questions answered also about City Year. So typically what will happen is for folks who have an application started or even are just in the exploration process of City Year, the recruiter will work with you throughout until application submission. So at this time, candidates are really focused on identifying who their references might be, choosing which city or location they might want to serve, and getting their short answers in place and the actual application itself. So we start with a submitted application, and then from there we move into our admissions process where we select interviews and whatnot.
Thanks, Dawn. So yeah, once you submit your application, it will come to me or another admissions manager. We take some time and read through your application, look at your short answers, look at your experiences and your references if they're in, and then we make our first decision if you move on from the application review stage to the interview stage. We'll then reach out and try and schedule an interview with you. The interviews are typically over the phone, but they can also be done in person or over Skype. You'll interview with a member of our team, and then we will take that interview, review your application again and your references, and then we will make a decision. The process from deadline day to finding out if you receive an offer typically lasts around a month. And if you do receive an offer, you'll have a period of time to think that over and make your decision, which is typically around 2 weeks, sometimes a little bit more. As far as the references go, you can submit your application and make your way through the process, including the interview, before we get your references in, but we aren't able to give you a decision until we get those references in. So that's a big part of my job as well, is to work with you on getting those references in. And then, if you are offered and confirm, I'll kind of work with you from that time until our core year starts in July. So preparing you for the transition into city year and possible relocation.
Thank you, Zach and Dawn. So on that, Karina, can you talk a little bit about our references? Are they letters? How are those submitted? And who would you suggest for individuals to select as a reference?
Sure. So the references are typically submitted online, and we do request professional references, so you cannot list friends or family members, unfortunately. We prefer professional references. And when you submit them online and you enter their contact information, we typically email them a link, and they click on that link, and that link they fill questions pertaining to your experiences, whether it was with teens or with youth, etc. And then we review that, and then that's how we consider whether or not the references apply based on our interest in our ideal candidate.
Does anyone have any tips as far as selecting your references, who would make a good reference, and then the best way to communicate with those individuals as well?
I can take this. So I think one of the ways that you can narrow down who those two professional references might be is thinking about the role that our city or AmeriCorps members play in schools and how those experiences played into it. So could be a professor. Perhaps you worked at a summer camp, or you currently work at your school's writing center. Having a supervisor, a previous supervisor, or professor, an advisor who can really speak to your qualifications and your personal characteristics would be really great references, and that's how to kind of choose them. If say you have 3 people who you think would make great references and you're not sure how to narrow that down, that's a really good opportunity to reach out to your recruiter and ask them what they think. I had a conversation with someone today about the very, very same thing on who to actually choose as a reference. And so those are my recommendations for actually choosing who you might want to ask to be a reference. The next step would actually be to ask that individual and see if they're willing and have the time to actually submit that for you. And you can explain to them that the process, as Karina explained, you would get an email, they would get an email link. The reference takes no more than 15 to 30 minutes to complete on your reference side. And so being able to set that expectation for them and seeing if they'd be willing to serve as a reference. Once they give you the go-ahead, that's when I would put their name and their contact information into your application. I think it's always a great idea, whether it's for city or really any position, to make sure that your references know what you're applying for and feel comfortable doing that for you.
Thank you, Dawn and Karina. Does anyone have any questions about the reference process, or anyone have any thoughts about the reference portion of the application? Great. So another question that came up as something is the experience section on the application. So Zach, when you're reviewing applications, what are some things that you look for in the experience section, and things that you would advise folks to maybe not include in that section?
Yeah, I think to answer that, you got to think about the nature of our work. So working in schools, we're looking for anything academic. If you have experience working with youth, I think that's great. But we also look for teamwork and leadership. So if you're part of any clubs on campus, that's a great thing to include. If you do lead peers through any projects, that's another excellent thing to have on there. I'd say any job or any professional responsibilities you've had are another great thing to include there. I would personally say the more stuff you have on there, the better. So I'd include anything like that.
So Karina, as someone who served somewhat recently, what would you say are some of the experiences that you and your teammates had that might not be typical or expected of someone, but really help them in their service?
Typical or expected from someone or our team?
So I think thinking a lot of, as we apply, if you haven't served as a tutor, you might not have worked directly with youth. But some of those other skills that can be transferable that you think some of your teammates brought in to the experience or that you had that really were helpful.
Yeah, so I think definitely more than anything, if you're a college student currently, we don't really realize that a lot of the skills that you developed while in college, those are to transfer into your experience with City Year. And it does set a foundation for you. And then I would say that having worked in a team and collaborated with different groups of people, we did not come in thinking that it would be academically focused, and more so that it was towards the mentoring initiative of it. But City Year does a really good job in supporting and ensuring that you have an understanding of how to develop those different skills and how to ensure that students are successful with regards to academics. So I would say the foundation your degree has for you, and if you were in high school, having worked in teams, and then moving forward, obviously, while in City Year, that's something that you can expect. We do a lot of event planning. I did not expect to go into City Year doing that either. In Miami, we have coordinator roles, and I think other sites do that as well. So that's something that you can expect from your time in City Year. So you were to do interventions, you are to do a lot of mentoring, but more than anything, you're coordinating with your team, planning events for the school and for the students, and ensuring that they're being provided with different resources that your supervisor also ensures that they have. So maybe those different aspects of the program, if that answers the question, because I didn't think that I would have to do any of those things while coming into City Year, and they're not really highlighted or touched based on the website. But you can expect to be supported in that sense as well.
Does anyone have any other questions or comments about the experience portion of the application? So another question is, how do you, I think Dawn or Karina, whoever wants to jump on this, when you're applying, can you talk a little bit about how the selection of a location works, as well as what advice do you have to individuals about choosing a location?
So I can take this one. The application will allow you to choose two different options. The first is choosing your top city preference, and then you have the ability to choose 3 additional locations of interest, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then the second option is serve where most needed, and so we do have some cities where we are trying to increase our candidate pool, and so these are highlighted on our website on sites to consider, and it's a great way to kind of just see what those cities have to offer. If you are looking at choosing where you'd like to serve, it happens a couple different ways. I have candidates who will serve in the city that is closest to where they grew up or perhaps where they're from. I have other candidates who are looking at colleges or graduate school, and so they want to serve in the areas where they are considering going to school in the future. I have candidates who move to cities that they've never been to before because I think it's a great time for them to do that. And they look at various aspects of our website to see the different neighborhoods that our core members might live in, or the cost of living, as well as some of the social media handles and that our different city or locations have. It's a way to do some research and find out what the culture of that actual city is. In terms of City Year selecting sites, we don't necessarily do that for our candidates. So for example, let's say you apply to Philadelphia as your top choice and you list Boston, Miami, and Dallas as 3 additional locations. We will review your application for Philadelphia if we think you're a qualified candidate, but we don't have a spot for you at that time, we will then look at the other 3 locations that you listed, and we will reach out to those sites and say, hey, we have this great candidate. We think they would be a good fit. We just don't have a spot for them. And then we would try to place you in one of your other cities of interest, or be able to offer you a position in one of those other cities. So it is a choice that our candidates have, and it's one that we're really happy to be able to provide to our candidates to be able to choose where they'd like to serve.
Thank you, Dawn. So Zach and Karina, as 2 City Year alumni, can you talk a little bit about how you chose the site that you served at when you went through the application process?
Yeah, so I served in Columbia, South Carolina. I'm originally from Greensboro, North Carolina, so it was the closest to home. It was about 3 hours away. I also was looking into Columbia, and I saw that they had one of the smaller cores, and that was something that was important to me. I really enjoyed the kind of like familial vibe that they had in Columbia, and it was really nice being at a small site. It was close to home. I was able to go back and forth, and I also had some friends that were moving to Columbia, so that made it a little bit easier too.
Thanks, Zach. With me, it was more so that I wanted to come back home. I wanted to serve in my community, so I chose Miami. I moved 5 hours away for college, and then once I graduated, it just seemed fit that I would serve not only my community, but the city that I grew up in and the schools that I attended. And I was very privileged in that I served at the school that I graduated from. So it was very, very close to home for me. And I thought that it was a direct impact, not only for myself, being that I grew a lot from the experience, but it was a direct impact on the students that I worked with, because they understood not only that they were able to attend college, but they used me as an example. So those were different things that I decided that I needed to do for myself when just selecting the site that I wanted to choose. And it's also one of the bigger cities. So I really think that it's important to consider the high need sites, just putting that out there. We have quite a few, I believe it's 5 or 4 high need sites, and Miami happened to be one of them. And I just felt that it would be nice to serve one of the communities that needed it the most.
So something that I think we've all kind of mentioned a little bit is high need sites. So I think, Zach, would you be able to explain a little bit about what that means? If your people are looking to apply, what that means for high need sites when there's 28 sites in the country.
Yeah, for sure. So City Year is growing every year. We add more AmeriCorps member positions at each of our cities. So some of our higher need sites are cities that have experienced some rapid growth. So a city like Miami, where their core keeps growing, we want to put more core members in those schools. We want to support as many students as we can. So those are the sites that they have more spots. They have maybe less applications per position. So we encourage people to consider those cities to help increase our impact there.
Thank you. But know that all of our sites do need AmeriCorps members. And so don't think that just because a site is listed as high need, that you need to rule out possibly serving close to home or close to where you have a pull to a site. But those are definitely ones that to consider and that do need us even more. So we're going to move on to talk a little bit about the essay and the short answer portion of the application. So I'm going to first ask our recruiters to talk a little bit about what advice do you have when working on your essays, and then passing it over to Zach to tell us what he is looking for and the admissions team are looking for when they review applications. So Dawn or Karina, feel free to hop in and talk about what tips you have for folks when working on that portion.
So just with regards to writing. Okay, so those essay pieces, my biggest tip is grammar. I could not stress that more. I really, really, really place a lot of emphasis on grammar just because I think that it's really good to have all of your essays revised by anyone, a teacher, a mentor, just have it revised. Because if it's something that we can't really understand, then it's kind of sad that we didn't get to really understand what you were trying to express. And just kind of really reflecting on how the mission resonates with you. I think it's really important to read essays that highlight significant moments in your life as they relate to the purpose of City Year. And it obviously gives us an understanding of why you would like to serve. So really, really doing a lot of research on the mission and the purpose of City Year prior to writing, as opposed to just going into it and not really understanding what the role entails. So those are some of the tips that I have for you.
I would also add that I think a lot of candidates get really overwhelmed with the short answers, and they want to try to fit everything in to those short answers, and there is a word and character limit. And so just know that they're almost like mini personal statements that you can, for you to showcase some of the things that Karina just mentioned, and really wanting to see how your personal values align with the culture of our organization and how that would actually play out within City Year. And we're also, the second question is really focused around your long-term and short-term career and professional goals, and how does City Year fit into that, and being able to articulate that in a way, identifying certain aspects of our service that would help you in those toward those long-term goals, and not just I want the scholarship that Drexel is going to give me for serving, but really thinking about what is it about the position and the experience of working at City Year? What are those tangible skills that you are then going to be able to take with you, regardless of what your next step is after City Year? And I'm going to check mark having someone else read and look over your short answers. That is something that many recruiters will actually do for you. Usually if you send it to them with like a week's notice of the deadline at least, or want your resume reviewed. I know we're talking about short answers, but even with resumes, a lot of recruiters want to see you be successful in the application process. We want qualified talent, and we want to be able to support you and provide any additional insight we can. So your recruiter is a great resource even for those short answers.
And do you recommend folks working on their essays, on those short answer questions in the application, or maybe on another platform?
Definitely another platform. I recommend doing it in Word. It gives you the opportunity to kind of send it along to someone else for that second eye. It also, if there happens to be a glitch with the application, you won't lose what you've been working on. And it's also just really great to have when you get to the, preparing for the interview, and which I know Zach, sees a lot of and does a lot of interviewing. And so that also is a good reminder as you're prepping for your actual interview as to why you want to work for this organization, and how do your skills and experiences fit into that.
Thank you. So Zach, when you are reviewing the applications, what are things that shine for you, and things that you would advise against in those both positively and negatively will impact someone being moved to the next step in the process?
Yeah. So what I really like about the short answers, the first question is, why are you applying to serve as a City Year AmeriCorps member? Tell us your story. And I think that last part, tell us your story, that's the biggest part, is I want to hear your individual story. So it's kind of hard to say. There's no right answer for the first one because it's unique to you. One of the things that City Year prides itself on is the diversity of our core. We want people from all different backgrounds and with all different stories. So just, make sure to really get your voice across. This is your opportunity to tell us about yourself, and we really want to hear about you. So what led you to this moment where you are applying to City Year, where you want to serve with us? I think those personal anecdotes do a lot for me personally. The second question, talking about how it fits in with your personal and professional goals. We understand City Year is a one-year program. We understand that you will likely move on and go do other great things, and we want to help support that. That's a big part of our service model, is the professional development and preparing our core members for their life after City Year. So talk about the benefit that City Year can provide for you in your long-term goals. Talk about what your passion is and how City Year will help you achieve that passion. I think Karina and Don, you both touched on, I guess, some of the negative things. When I see short answers with spelling errors and or that are just maybe a sentence long, to me, what that means is that someone didn't, they didn't take the effort to ask someone else to look through it. So I think that's the biggest thing, is making sure that it's grammatically correct, that you show that you did put effort into your application.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other thing they want to share or questions you receive about the short answers questions? One thing that I like to tell folks is when you are working on those and you have 100 thoughts that you want to put in, and Dawn, you touched on it, that especially for our college students who are used to writing really long papers, having to be limited is a challenge. Jot those notes down. So jot those other experiences, those other life goals you have, jot them down on paper, because sometime during the interview process, you may be able to share those pieces, but knowing those are important to you and some of the reasons why you are choosing to apply for our program. So next we're going to move into the role of the recruiter. So Dawn mentioned at the beginning with our process is that every applicant will be assigned to a recruiter. Can you talk a little bit about what recruiters do? So someone already is interested in the program. What should folks expect to receive from recruiters, and what, as a recruiter, would you like to hear back from our applicants?
Sure. So if you've already in our system, you probably have noticed that you're receiving emails. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Some of the emails will come directly from our system and they're automatic. And then there are emails that I will send as your recruiter. And so if you are on one of the campuses that I recruit at, you will most likely get an email, and other recruiters do this as well. You'll get an email saying where I'll be on campus, how we can meet, and hopefully we can find some time in person to touch base about City Year, or if we're hosting an info session, being able to come to that. So the role of the recruiter is really creating a presence on campuses and connecting with people on a very informational level, but then also helping you maneuver through this application process and choosing a deadline, choosing a location, and having those conversations, just being a sounding board, and even sometimes whether or not City Year is the right fit for you. We have those conversations as well. So I would take advantage of the opportunity to connect with your recruiter. Many of us use online scheduling tools, so it's a great way to set up a time to speak via phone. Those are usually set up in 15-minute blocks. It's a great way to just have a one-on-one with your City Year recruiter, hear about their experience working for City Year. Perhaps they served, like Karina or Zach, but also just being able to have that kind of one-on-one time and ask as many questions as you can. So we also mentioned being able to provide support through short answer review or resume review, and providing tips on that. So those are all things that I provide to my prospects who are in the process. And many of our candidates who talk to their recruiter throughout the experience, even at least once, do fare much better throughout the entire application process, and are often accepted or invited to serve because they are more prepared than other candidates who do not connect with their recruiter.
Zach, can you talk a little bit about that? So applicants have you seen a difference with applicants who have had a relationship with a recruiter?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I look for, as I kind of mentioned before, is your investment in City Year. City Year is a service program. You have to be invested and committed to serving with us to make it through. So showing that you've talked to a recruiter, having background information on City Year, is really important. I love when I ask someone, if they're familiar with a certain component of City Year service, and they tell me, yeah, I talked to Karina, I talked to Don, they told me all about this. I know what the uniform looks like. I know, the ABCs. I think that's a really big thing and shows a level of commitment.
Thank you. I think one thing I would say is just add that communication. If you don't have questions, let a recruiter know, I don't have questions at this time, or I'm not interested right now, and let them know that. Most of the time we'll try and stay in touch with you. If we don't hear from you, we don't know from you. So we're gonna do our best to make sure we follow up with folks and make sure that is important. So we talked a little bit about talking with a recruiter, responding to the information that you're getting. What other research would you, anyone, recommend to our prospects and applicants?
The City Year website is a great resource. There is a ton of information online geared towards our applicants to explain our service model and what we do. So I would say that is a great first place to look and a great starting point.
On top of that, I would also recommend the City Year blog. So the national blog is updated pretty regularly, and it will encompass stories both from currently serving AmeriCorps members as well as City Year alumni. And you can hear about their experience, what they're doing now. There are different categories, I believe, on the right-hand side where you can search based on the Corps member experience or professional development and see all of the blog posts that are related to what you might be looking for. And then on top of that, I do recommend social media. We are on Snapchat. I personally don't know how to use Snapchat, but I'm sure many of you do. And so City Year is on Snapchat, Instagram. Many of our school teams have, some of our school teams have Instagram accounts as well. And it's a great way to just see some of what our Corps members are experiencing day to day, especially if you're interested in particular cities, just doing a search on some of their social media handles and seeing what's happening at the city that you're interested in. And it, obviously provides additional information, but it also, I believe, gets some of our candidates more excited about going through the process. And I had a candidate just last week talk about how she watched a YouTube video about City Year and became even more inspired to complete her application and to go through this process. So it can definitely increase that motivation and also just reaffirm your desire to serve at City Year and what City Year has to offer for you.
I was going to say YouTube, but Don beat me to it. I always recommend that applicants go on YouTube, especially because different sites have specific videos that are tailored to their Corps and their experiences. And I think that it obviously does help illustrate the experience in a little bit more in-depth manner, especially if reading it doesn't really help illustrate that for you. It's really interesting just to see and watch Corps members in action and talk about how it's rewarding and the impact that they're making. Obviously, it doesn't displace students, but it is interesting to watch them in the school setting as well and talking about the different things that each site is doing.
So Karina and Zach, before you applied or while you were applying, who did you talk to and what resources did you utilize?
So yeah, I used all the ones that we've mentioned. I think Heather Turner was a great resource. She's our recruiter based in Columbia. She was able to provide me with a ton of information. And I actually was fortunate enough to be able to go down to Columbia and attend an open house that Heather hosted. That gave me a ton of information. And yeah, I had a lot of background information. My sister served with City Year before I did. So I had that relationship. But that open house really opened my eyes to a lot of the work that City Year does.
So mine was a little different. I did not have a great recruiter like Heather at the time. I didn't hear from a recruiter. I think it was just kind of more so something that I heard from a professor, and it seemed like something that I should be doing at the time. So I kind of filled out the application, and I did watch a YouTube video. I'll definitely say that. And I mostly just used the website. I really, really try to familiarize myself with the purpose. I even read into the statistics based on the measurements and how really effective City Year was at the time. So that really helped me and it convinced me. So those were the resources that I used. But obviously there are a lot more since I served. So.
Great. So, and Zach, I wasn't trying to probe you, but speaking with an alumni, and obviously your sister is your sister as well, but talking with alumni, how did that help you better understand the program or understand what you were getting into?
Yeah. I think City Year is it's a complex program. There's a lot that goes on during the year, and it's hard to summarize that all into one individual blog post. So being able to sit down with someone who did experience that and did spend a year working with us, I was able to learn so much more and hear about the little things that might not make it into those blog posts. So I would say that's probably the biggest benefit that I had there. I of course had a lot of time to talk to my sister about it, so we kind of went through all of the nitty gritty. But I think hearing an individual's unique perspective on their service year, and especially someone that knows you, if you have a friend that served with City Year, they can talk to you and see how you would fit into our Corps.
Thank you. So we're kind of at the end of the application. So just talk a little bit about our deadlines. So we have multiple deadlines throughout the year. What's your advice on having someone submit an application for anyone? What would you, for all of our panelists, what would you suggest for folks as far as submitting an application? When's the best time to do it? So share your thoughts on submitting an application.
I recommend submitting your application in the earliest deadline that works for you. So we know that we are not the only option or program or career path that you might have in mind. For some of you, it is. If you know 100% that City Year is your next step after high school or college graduation, then I say apply in the earliest deadline that you can submit a quality application. But if you're waiting to hear back from graduate schools or if you applied to other programs, try to look at the timelines for each of those and work backwards with our City Year deadline. So Zach spoke about, it takes about a month for us to process our applications from the moment that our deadline happens. There's a notification date, and then you would have about 3 weeks to accept or decline that offer if an offer is made. So you can kind of work backwards and see how do the other things that you're applying for fit into that. At this point in the year, we'll have, with March 9th, we have 4 deadlines remaining. And so really figuring out which of those deadlines align nicely. For those of you who are college students who are graduating in May, if you want to know before commencement, then you should apply no later than our April 13th deadline. So really thinking about what's most important to you and how do those timelines fit into everything and having all of your options, if you will, as best you can on the table at the same time, and then being able to make a decision that works best for you and where you see yourself down the road.
And each deadline is the same, is for the same start date. So it's for positions starting at the beginning of the academic year, which is the end of July. So don't think if you're applying to one deadline, you're going to start at a different time. I would also suggest not waiting until that date that is the deadline. Always submit a little bit earlier. Right now we are on February 28th with about a week and a half to our March 9th deadline. Use the weekend before to work on your application. Don't wait till Friday night to submit that application. So you do have till 11:59 p.m. in the time zone that you sit on that deadline to submit, but don't do that. Don't wait until that time to submit. Definitely, especially if you run into any problems or questions, and that does happen. So just know, working on it sooner, so you can reach out and someone from our staff can make sure that we help you before then. So hypothetically, you've just clicked the submit button on your application. What should you expect next?
Yeah, so you'll get a couple emails from us, one thanking you for submitting, and there will be another that kind of outlines the process, saying that our team is starting to review your application. Since we do operate with deadlines, we have a lot of applications to review after each deadline. So sometimes it takes us a little bit of time. It takes us a few days or sometimes a week or two to get through all of them. Once we do that initial review, that's when we reach out with the interviews and everything. Most of that is done over email, but sometimes we'll give you a call and try and schedule that as well. Yeah, and then we move on to reviewing the interview and all of that.
So with the interview, can you talk a little bit, or what advice, so this is for everyone, would you give to someone to prepare for an interview, and talk about how our interviews happen? Does everyone need to travel? Interview?
Yeah, I can start with this one. So most of our interviews are done over the phone or over Skype. You can sometimes schedule an in-person interview if you're applying to the city that you currently live in, or if you'll be there. But the majority of them, since we are recruiting nationally, do happen over the phone or over Skype. In terms of preparing for the interview, most of the interview is questions just generally about you. We want to know who you are and understand you as a person. So I take some time to sit down and think about your experiences, think about what times that you've worked on a team or shown leadership, and come up with, write a kind of story that explains what you did, and just kind of have that in the back of your mind when we get to the interview. And I'd recommend that for any interview, really, to have stories, have a little bank of stories that you can rely on when asked a given question.
I'll add
Karina
2 tips
or
for the
Dawn?
interview.
Yep, go for it. That's what I was going to ask, if our recruiters had any tips.
2 tips for the interview. The first one is a lot of times interviewers, whether it's city or otherwise, will ask you if there's anything else that you'd like to highlight about yourself. And that's an opportunity for you to share something that maybe you didn't get to in the interview so far, or maybe you want to re-emphasize your passion and desire for wanting to serve with City Year. And the second is being able to have questions. What questions do you have of your interviewer? And so that's the second tip that I have is, with any interview, you should come in with questions. And I think for our City Year interviews, I would recommend having those questions be less about logistics and how the program, some of the details about like the start date and that sort of thing, because you get all of that in advance, and there are various ways to find that information. But in most cases, your interviewer will actually be another staff member who's not on our recruitment and admissions team. So this could be an impact manager, and those are the individuals that actually oversee our AmeriCorps members in their day-to-day service. So that could be someone that might actually be your supervisor. So it's a great opportunity to ask them about their City Year experience, ask them questions about what it's been like to work at City Year, how they got to City Year, and really show an investment in wanting to learn a little bit more about your interviewer, but always have a couple of questions on hand to be able to ask your interviewer, City Year and otherwise. And okay, one more, third tip. Try and get your interviewer's name, first and last name, and be able to send that thank you email after the interview. It's something that is always drilled in through career services or through high school guidance counselors or whatnot, is always to send that thank you letter afterwards or thank you email, but you'd be surprised at how many people don't actually do that. Even though we know we should do it, so many people just don't. And I know that our interviewers would love to receive an email thanking them for their time, and also maybe something that stood out from your conversation.
Just wanted to add, I know it sounds repetitive, but again, the mission The mission is so important, really, really understanding what the AmeriCorps member position entails, those different responsibilities, although they vary by site. We do have one specific concept of what a City Year Corps member does that's very, very generic. So really, really understanding what that purpose is and what the purpose of City Year is and what you would be doing in turn to ensure that mission is being met. That's my advice, not only for City Year, but basically any position. Really recognize the purpose of and the mission of that organization. And because we test competencies, odd as it sounds, our website is very, very, very helpful. Really, really go over the website and try to use the website to leverage what you want to share to the interviewer. So using those different links, those different tabs is so, so crucial in preparation for that interview. And my last one, I love that Zach mentioned that you should jot down ideas and narrate your story. But one of them being crazy, as it sounds, is to discuss some of the challenges that you've had in the past, whether on teams, some of those conflicts in former teams or organizations in former positions or volunteer experiences. Write those things down and then try to memorize them, because oftentimes you're going to have to ask questions or answer questions pertaining to those experiences. So it would be nice for you to familiarize yourself. That way, when you're being placed on the spot, you don't struggle to answer or think back at those different conflicts that you've addressed in the past. So that would be my advice.
A couple
Go for it, Zach. Go, Zach.
So one, to Don's point of asking questions, as much as the interview is us finding information about you, it's also an opportunity for you to find information out about City Year. We go through all of our benefits. We list out a ton of information. Our interviewers will tell you a story about City Year during the interview. You'll hear what the work looks like. So make sure to pay attention to that and maybe take down some notes so you can leave with some more information as well. And then another just technical note, if you are doing a phone or Skype interview, make sure you're in a quiet place. That does happen all too often, where it can be kind of difficult to hear someone I'm interviewing, and make sure that it's a place where you have good cell reception, because that can also be really challenging.
And I guess to add on to what Zach was just saying, for a tip for those of you who are currently on college campuses, so many of your career services departments will actually allow you to utilize their interview rooms or have a quiet space. So like if you're concerned about doing it in your apartment or in your residence hall or in a space, just know that if you were to reach out to those services on campus, they most likely will have a room that you can actually use. They have also the Skype features. So if you think that it would be better to do a Skype interview, but you personally don't have access to that, knowing that your resources on campuses they have the ability to help set you up for that, as long as you give them some advanced notice on how to do that, and that you would need that opportunity or that space.
Thank you. Those are the things I was going to hit on that everyone hit on. I think the one additional tip I would say is when you are in the interview, even if you're not in that space, is to but mentally be in that space. So if you're not sitting across the room from that individual that's interviewing you, you are sitting there. So being professionally dressed, at least from what can be seen, needs to be professionally dressed, eye contact, and understanding that this virtual space is something that's different for all of us. It's not something, some of us do it regularly, but it's not the way we will communicate when you're actually working with City Year. So just realize that, and even when you're on the phone, like Zach said, be in a space that's quiet. If we're interviewing you and you are sitting on a bus, we probably will know that, but we won't know if you're sitting on your couch or at a desk. But being in that very professional space will allow you to act as though you are sitting in front of someone. So feel that you should be sitting in front of someone. So we just got to the interview. You finished the interview. What happens next?
Yeah, so that's when I would take your application and your references and notes from your interviewer, and I'd sit down with our team in that city. So we would go through all of our candidates and we make those decisions. You'll know during your interview and maybe before that when the day is that you'll find out your decision. As I said before, it's typically about a month after the deadline, but we'll reach out and we'll give you your decision. We'll let you know if you're offered a position, or maybe encourage you to apply again the next year. If you are offered, there's a window of time that you have, typically 2 to 3 weeks, and yeah.
And that will come phone, email, text,
Yeah,
pigeon.
so you'll always get an email, and you should always get a phone call. But yeah, definitely an email.
And then once you accept a position, just briefly, what will those next steps be? So if I accepted a position, say in a couple weeks, what do I expect from now until July?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so preparing for your service year is a really big component of my job, is to help you prepare. So one of the big ways we do that is through a Facebook group. We use Facebook to have as a means of communication. It's a general hub for outreach. It's a great way for you to get to know your future teammates as well. A lot of our core members are moving to a new city to serve with City Year. So that transition in finding roommates, finding housing, the Facebook group is a great resource for that. Your admissions manager will have some context around where our schools are, where popular neighborhoods are, maybe even apartment complexes that core members have lived in the past. So they're a great resource for that. We are here to help you. We want you to serve. We want more people in our schools working with students. So we are here to facilitate that process and try and make it as easy as we can for you. So there's that. And then there's also, preparation, like mental preparation for working in a school. So we'll send you information about more details on what your service will look like. We'll highlight some of our core members. We'll show you the different schools we serve in and just get you ready to go. So when you show up, you know what you're getting yourself into.
So we have about 9 minutes left. So what I'm going to ask is, if everyone can just share one piece of advice you have for someone who is considering applying for City Year.
If you're considering applying, my biggest piece of advice is do it. Submitting an application is not, there's not a huge commitment around that. You can apply and, decide maybe after the interview if it's not for you, but you don't know if you don't apply. So I definitely recommend just do it. Sit down, write your essays, get your references in, and submit the application. This might be the program for you and you just don't know it yet. So I just recommend to do it.
Yeah, I think so often I meet people who are, City Year is one of my options, but they haven't even started an application. And the thing about it is, we're not considering you if you're not one of our options if you don't submit that application. So I'm going to second Zach and say, submitting that application is probably the first step, along with everything else that we talked about before, and spending time and understanding our mission and making sure that your values and goals align. But if you think that City Year could be a great option for you, then there's no harm in submitting that application. And at the very least, even if City Year is not the right fit for you, you are getting additional experience in applying for jobs. And that's also a skill that takes practice.
I'll go ahead and add that we recruit students of all majors, not just education. So it does not matter if you're currently in a STEM degree or if you're pre-med, obviously, or if pre-law. City Year really does benefit anyone and everyone. And the students really, really need people like you. So I'm just putting that out there. Again, submit those applications. It does not matter what path you think you want to take. City Year really just helps set that foundation for you.
Thank you. And my piece of advice that I always tell my prospects and my applicants is, if you're thinking about it while you're working on that application and you're working on your personal, you're working on your short answer questions and you're preparing yourself for an interview, you're doing the research during that time is when you can mentally think, I really want to do this, and this is something I'm committed to doing and something I'm interested in, as well as that time during your interview when you're talking with the person interviewing you, talking about their experiences, really gaining that knowledge and information and absorbing it all to decide if it is something that you want to do. But like, when you actually submit the application, you can't serve. So it is the first step in the process, and City Year has resources for you to have a full understanding. If you're hesitant about what it means to live on a stipend, what it means to work on a team, we will help you and talk to you about that. We can set you up with alumni currently serving AmeriCorps members. All of those pieces, we have that, but sometimes if you don't let us know, we can't help you with that. So make sure you let us as staff know that. And Zach, when folks, after they're confirmed, that's something I know our admissions team wants you to do as well. Ask those questions. Don't wait till the day before you start or a week before or 2 weeks after you've started to ask those questions. Ask the questions. No question is a bad question. And if it is, we'll still answer it. So be sure to keep those options open. Does anyone have any final comments before we wrap up?
I have a technical piece of advice. A couple of times we mentioned that you'll be receiving emails. A lot of the way that we process our applications, Zach mentioned, you'll get an email to set up interviews and all those types of things. Oftentimes our emails may end up in your spam, junk, clutter, promotions folder. So especially for those of you with .edu email addresses, just be aware and check that, because we would hate for you to miss out on the opportunity to interview with us because our email went to another folder. So I think just making sure that you're aware of that, and just being open and communicating with us along the way. It's okay to tell us no, and we're used to hearing that, and we actually wish more folks would communicate with us. If at any point in the process you realize it's not for you, a simple email or a respond to our text or or even a call back is really helpful for us, because then we can we can stop sending you all the emails and whatnot. But just kind of be aware of that. Our emails may go to other folders, and we also it's okay for you to tell us that you've found another position, or that maybe City Year isn't the right fit for you, and don't be afraid to do that. But we want you to serve with us, and our students need you to serve.
I want to echo the last thing Karina said about the college major. I'm often asked what makes an ideal City Year candidate, and that really is an impossible question to ask. We've talked about the diversity of our core, and that is such a valuable thing. We don't want a core full of the same person. We want your unique experiences. We want what you bring to the table. So the ideal candidate, I always say, it's someone who is passionate and committed to the mission, to helping students get on track for graduation, and someone who's willing to learn and wants to go through a service year. But there's no one specific thing that makes someone qualified or unqualified.
Thank you, Zach. And Karina and Dawn for answering our questions tonight, and for sharing your thoughts and questions. We are all available if you have additional questions. You've probably received the link to this video from a recruiter or someone who works for City Year, so feel free to reach out to them if you want to get in touch with one of us. Ask them for that information, but just a hint is our emails are typically our first initial and last name at cityyear.ed.org. Don't put edu, it will not come to us. I think, John, you saying that .edu email through me. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and thank you for your interest in City Year. Have a great evening.